Welcome to Draft Utopia, guys. Chris Ransom and Joseph Potter here, set to break down the running back rankings for the 2025 NFL Draft here on TalkShoe and Restream. We will also have a part two on Restream where we break down the Central Division and NFL predictions. And for those wondering, are you going to have the fullback rankings? Yeah, I did finish the fullback rankings. I even finished coding all of week 5, but I'm going to save the fullback rankings for next week because we got so much on our plate next week with final NHL division, midseason report cards are about to begin. I know that's one of Joey's favorite segments on this show. And MLB playoffs, the ALDS and NLDS do start next Saturday. So we just have a ton on our plate. It doesn't make logistical sense to rush into the wide receiver rankings next Saturday when you have all that on your plate, Joey. It just doesn't. So by doing the fullback rankings next week, we can have a little bit of an easier show, a little bit more of a fun show, and we can tackle all those tedious topics after we knock out the fullback rankings, which there's only 5. I only put 5 fullbacks in my fullback rankings. I have 20 running backs to get to. Go ahead. It's not that I don't want to do the receiver rankings. It just doesn't make logistical sense to do them next week. Any other Saturday would be perfect. Next week is just not a good week to do them for the reasons I mentioned. But again, we're going to get into the Doak Walker watch list article Wes posted. And I've got my running back rankings in the news ticker here. My running back one is Ashton Jeanty, Boise State running back. That should come as no surprise. I had this guy at 26 on my board back in July. I have moved him up quite a bit on my big board here. Yeah, and if you're listening on TalkShoe, it says running back ranking, and then there's a D at the end instead of an S. That's a typo, and I cannot edit that until after the recording ends. Unfortunately, that's a typo, and TalkShoe wouldn't let me edit it, so it's there. I'll edit it after the recording today, before I post on social media later this afternoon. But as far as my big board goes, I had Ashton Jeanty at 26. I moved him all the way up to 13. That's how good he's been this year, that I've already doubled his draft value has doubled since July. He was at 26 in July. He's now at 13 on my board. Um, he's 13th on my board so far, Ashton Jeanty. He's moved all the way up from 26 to 13. 56 carries, 586 rushing yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns in 3 games. And, you know, I saw Ashton Jeanty against Oregon. I heard he tore it up the first week of the season, and he tore it up the second week. You know, he's going to be playing Washington State at 10 p.m. tonight. He's born in Jacksonville, Florida. So, I mean, he's going to be playing Washington State, an undefeated Washington State team, um, tonight at 10 p.m. I've seen him pass block well on tape, so I don't really have any questions about him. I've seen him pass catch quite a bit on tape whenever the quarterback targets him. Like he catch I did not see a single drop when he got balls thrown his way. Thing is, he wasn't like you look at what he did, yeah. He had 39 receptions for 552 yards and 5 touchdowns last year through the air. So, he's at over 500 receiving yards. And this is what pisses me off about ESPN. They will list targets for NFL players, but they will not list targets for college players. That's a double standard. And as a company as big as ESPN, that's just not acceptable. He had 118 receiving yards versus Air Force and 109 versus Washington last year. But in the other games, Washington and Air Force, those were the 2 games where he had 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. His volume's exceptional. His volume's exceptional. ESPN says he has 39 receptions, but they're not accounting for the bowl game. And if you account for the bowl game, he had 43 receptions on 48 targets. That was his volume last year. 43 receptions on 48 targets. Yeah. So I believe he does check every box, but John Vogel believes he will fall to round 2 because he's listed at 5'9". Some scouts might have him at 5'7", 5'8". So he thinks the height could knock him down into day 2. I don't, but we'll see. I think I mocked him to Dallas at 26, but I don't think he's even gonna fall to Dallas. In fact, I think he's gonna get picked in the top half of the draft. I honestly do. I think somebody who needs a running back is gonna take GT in the top half of the first round. It's gonna be like when Jahmyr Gibbs went to top half. Yeah, and here's the thing. There are 2 teams in the top 12 that could take Ashton Jeanty, depending on what happens with the running back position. If Javonte Williams is a free agent. If Ashton Jeanty is there at 12, the Broncos are going to grab Jeanty as the bell cow for Bo Nix. And if the Browns let Nick Chubb walk, they have 7th pick. I could see the Browns just taking Jeanty and reloading. I think the Browns want to keep Nick Chubb. I think the Browns want to keep Nick Chubb. But if Nick Chubb leaves for some reason, Jeanty's probably the guy they pick. They'll look at him as the Bijan for their offense. That's probably going to be the thought process. 'Cause I'm looking at the top 12 on Tankathon. They have Jacksonville at 1, Tennessee at 2, Cincinnati 3, the Giants at 4. They're going to pick a quarterback, even though they do need a running back too. Colts at 5, Patriots at 6. They paid Stevenson. Browns at 7, Dolphins at 8. They've still got Achane and Jalen Wright on a rookie deal. Panthers at 9, they've got Jonathan Brooks. Bears at 10, they paid Swift a bunch of money, even though I do think GT would be an asset to Chicago. The Ravens at 11, they've got Derrick Henry for one more year, even though I could see them drafting an understudy to Henry and Denver at 12. I think if Cleveland passes on GT's going to end up on Denver if this draft remains as it is. Because as much as I'd like to see GT on the Bengals, because I know it would irritate you, it's not going to happen because the Bengals are probably going to take a Luther Burden or a Tatoria McMillan at 3 if either one falls to them, and that player would replace Higgins if Higgins left. That's probably what they would do because they have Mims replacing Trent Brown now at right tackle, and their left tackle is Orlando Brown Jr. So logistically, they're either going to take a corner or a receiver. I don't really see them going any other route. If they like Will Johnson or Benjamin Morrison more than any of the receivers in the draft, I could see that. But if Higgins leaves, it's the perfect opportunity to reload at receiver if you're drafting that high. I think the Bengals will turn this around. I don't think they'll draft that high. But yeah, next running back. Yeah. Yeah, the tankathon is Ashton Jeanty at 17 to Dallas. I mocked him to Dallas at 26, but I don't think he make it to Dallas right now. I don't think he's going to make it to Dallas. If he tears it up the combine, I don't see him making it to Dallas, Joey, because he's already moved up from 26th to 13th on my board since July. So if he's moved up that much, I don't see him making it to Dallas at 17. Yeah. I had Ole Gordon here for much of the draft process, but I have a new running back too, and that is Quashawn Junkins. Because I know that Gordon does a lot well, but he doesn't do a lot well. He hasn't done a lot well consistently. He does everything pass block, catch out of the backfield, but he doesn't do it consistently. And, you know, I'm looking at Quashawn Judkins, who had dominated against Marshall last week for Ohio State as that second running back that could work their way into the first round. Judkins is 32 on my board. He probably is an early second round pick, but right now he's at 336 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns on the year. And he's had 2 seasons with 1,000 rushing yards and 15 rushing touchdowns to show for it. 15 receptions, 22 receptions, 2 receptions. Not a lot of volume, less volume in the passing game than with Judkins and Ginty. Um, but again, I haven't seen him pass block on tape. I've seen GT pass block on tape. I'm gonna look at the targets for Quishon Judkins. Yeah, Derrick Henry, maybe. Yeah, my there is. There is. And my number 3 running back, I believe, is O'Marion Hampton, but I'm just double checking here. I'm just going through the running back rankings here on the live stream because I know running backs 1 and 2. I have 20 running backs getting drafted in my running back rankings, but I have a mind-boggling third I have a mind-boggling 14 running backs with third round grades. I don't think that many will get picked on day 2, but that's how deep this running back draft is. That I actually have 14 running backs in my top 20 in the first 3 rounds of the draft right now. I don't think we'll see that many go on day 2, but 14 in the first 2 days. That's how deep this running back draft is. So probably the deepest position on offense. And, you know, right now, I think O'Marion Hampton is my RB3, but I am double checking the news ticker before I load up the information here. Yep. O'Marion Hampton, North Carolina. I have a second round grade on him. I moved him ahead of Ole Gordon because I did have Ole Gordon as my running back 2 entering the year, but Ole Gordon's had a disappointing start to his season. But yeah, O'Marion Hampton's at 555 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. And I mean, O'Marion Hampton looks he's already at 6 this year, and he's at 555 yards through, the 2024 season so far, 85 carries. Yeah, I had an 89 potential grade on Javonte Williams coming out of North Carolina when I thought he reminded me of Nick Chubb with much less of a ceiling. His running style was similar to Chubb, his ceiling wasn't. I have a 93 on Hampton right now for ceiling, but I have a floor of 77, which means it's going to take 3 years for Hampton to reach his ceiling, but if he does, you're going to get a special running back. So, just stay patient. Yeah, yeah, even if he doesn't reach that ceiling, he will be a low end number 2 running high end number 2, low end number 1 running back at the very worst. Yeah. Floor grade's a 77, ceiling grade's a 93 out of 99. So I think his floor is higher than the next running back on my list, Oli Gordon, who was my running back too at the beginning of the year, the Doak Walker Award winner. But he's had he had the DUI before the start of the season after winning the Doak Walker Award last year. I mean, he had 1,732 yards, 21 rushing touchdowns on 285 carries. He just flat out dominated last year. And then this year, he's at 73 carries, 258 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. He's gone from 6.1 yards a carry to 3.5 yards a carry. Um, you know, and he had 20 receptions, 39 receptions, and now he's had 9 this year, but he hasn't reached the end zone. And he does pass block well at times, but he doesn't pass block well consistently. And really, his only dominant game was against San Diego State. He had 28 carries, 126 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Arkansas, Tulsa, and Utah all held him to under 50 rushing yards. And he's still able to get a reception in each of those games. He had 3 receptions, 20 yards against San Diego State, 2 receptions, 20 yards against Arkansas, 1 reception, 4 yards, Tulsa, 3 receptions, 16 yards against Utah. He can make those plays. He just doesn't make those plays, big time plays consistently. Like last year, the guy dominated, hasn't dominated this year. And I still have him in round 2. But yeah, yeah. He was good at pass blocking, and for potential, I gave him a 96, which is the same ceiling grade I gave Will Johnson, Michigan corner, Will Campbell. I gave him a 96 for ceiling, but I gave him a 76 for floor. I think it's going to take him 4 years to reach his ceiling, and that's if he puts in the work. If he doesn't put in the work, he may not reach his ceiling. And I'd say there's a 50-50 chance he reaches his ceiling right now. That's why. And I had him at a 79 for floor at the beginning of the year, but I dropped him 3 points due to how inconsistent he's been. I dropped his floor grade 3 points due to how inconsistent he's been. So I would say right now there's a 50-50 chance. Maybe Joey thinks there's a 40 to 49% chance. I'm not saying he won't reach his ceiling, but right now it looks like a 50-50 coin flip right now. It looks like a coin flip on, and that's not what you want with a first round pick. I still have him in round 2, but I moved him out of round 1, and it's obvious why based on what we've seen so far. And I think there's still time for him to move back into round 1, but he's got to take advantage of the opportunity he gets in the remaining 8 games. Agreed. But running backs 1 through 4 are good ones. I have next player on my list. I think it's Kyle Monangai, the Rutgers running back. I think he's number 5, but I'm double checking the news ticker here. But Gene T. Judkins, I have Gene T at 13 on my board, Judkins at 32. I have O'Marion Hampton at 34, and I have Ole Gordon at 42 on my big board right now. So, and number 5 is Jaden Ott. Kyle Monangai is 30. Kyle Monangai is RB6, but Jaden Ott, yeah, Jaden Ott out of California. I do like Jaden Ott. I mean, I Jaden Ott was really good last year. When you give him space, he takes off. He probably Cal's best running back since Marshawn Lynch. I don't want to compare him to Lynch because the numbers this year are underwhelming compared to what he did the season ago. So far. Last year, he had 1,305 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, 26 receptions, 196 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. This year, he's at 40 carries, 133 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 8 receptions, 40 receiving yards. And it's the same thing with Ole Gordon, where you want to buy into the hype, you want to buy into what Jay Nott's selling, but the production just isn't there so far. I mean, UC Davis and Auburn. Auburn held him to 11 rushing yards. UC Davis held him to 49, despite him getting 2 rushing touchdowns against UC Davis. He had 73 rushing yards on Florida State. I'll give him credit for that. But, you know, you would have liked to see him do more because Florida State got their first win of the year against Cal. That does not reflect well on Jaden Ott because Jaden Ott was considered a top 5 running back in this draft. And, you know, he couldn't beat a winless Florida State team that was getting embarrassed by their opponents. So I'll give him credit for having his best game against Florida State, but a game like that just keeps him out of round 1. I do have him at 43 on my board. I have the same floor grade on Jalen Ott that I have from Ole Gordon because I saw a little bit more effort from Ott than I did from Gordon, but I think his ceiling's lower than Gordon's, but I have him at 43 on my big board. Maybe that's a little too high, but Jaden Ott, I did like what I saw from him last year. And I saw him make some big runs against Florida State, even though they held him to 73 yards, kept him out of the end zone. He showed good effort against Florida State. I watched last Saturday's game, and he showed good effort in that loss. Kyle Monong. Yeah. Next running back on my rankings is Kyle Monongai, Rutgers. 90 last year, Kyle Monongai dominated at Rutgers. He was a big reason why Rutgers. Rutgers is a big reason why Rutgers. I think he made Big Ten first team this year, along with Judkins. Him and Judkins were the 2 running backs in the Big Ten first team. But yeah, Kyle Monongai had 242 carries, 1,262 rushing yards, and 8 rushing touchdowns in 2023. Showed a lot of promise on that Rutgers offense. And Rutgers was one of the pleasant surprise teams of last year. So you know, and what he's done this year has been incredible too. But, Kyle Monangai, I'll pull up his game log from last year. Then I'll pull up because Rutgers they had a 31-7 loss to Michigan. But outside of that, I mean, they had 2 losses heading into Ohio State, a loss to Wisconsin, a loss to Michigan, and even though they lost to Ohio State, Monangai had 159 rushing yards, Rutgers, in the loss to Ohio State. That was the second most rushing yards he had all season. He had 106, yeah, so it's third most, actually. He had 163 against Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl, and he had 165 against Temple, but he had 159 against Ohio State. So I do think this guy is legit. He had 4 games where 1, 2, 3, 4. He had 5 games where he was held under 50 rushing yards, and he didn't receive a lot of targets. So I can see why consistency would be an issue with Monangai for some scouts. But this year he looks a lot more lethal so far. But I think that's due to Rutgers having an easier strength of schedule. 165 yards, 1 rushing touchdown versus Howard, 208 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns versus Akron, 84 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown versus Virginia Tech, 132 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown versus Washington, only 3 receptions so far. And yeah, he's had a good start, but you would like to see a little bit more as well. So there's that. I'm looking at Rutgers' schedule here because I want to see who Monangai plays. Okay. The toughest Rutgers gets Nebraska on the road next Saturday. Then they get Wisconsin at home. Then they get UCLA at home. Then they get USC at home. Minnesota they get USC on the road. USC on the road is probably the toughest game for Rutgers. If they can win that, there's a legit chance Rutgers goes 12-0 because Rutgers does not play any of the top 5 teams in the Big Ten. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Penn State. They don't play Iowa, and they don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. That's a massive advantage for Rutgers. I mean, Kyle Monangai could end up leading the country in rushing yards due to how easy Rutgers' schedule is this year, Joey. And that's not a knock on Monangai, but at the same token, if Monangai finishes in the top 5 in rushing yards, that's what you're going to have to look at when evaluating him because Rutgers does have a really easy strength of schedule this year. And I do have a second round grade on Monangai, floor grade of 75, potential grade of 90. I have Monangai at 47 on my big board. He is he's the 6th running back on my rankings in the top 50. And I have 2 more running backs with the round 2 grade at the moment. Travion Henderson of Ohio State, I have him at 58 on my board. Hasn't really seen a lot of carries this year. We know what he can do. We've watched him for 3 years. We know what he can do. Yeah. I have him at running back 7 right now. And then Devin Neal, out of Kansas is my number 8 running back. I think I have all 8 of those running backs in the I have a bunch of running backs in the second round. So I have 6 running backs in the apparently I had that's weird. This thing says I have Devin Neal ahead of okay, yeah, I did have Devin Neal ahead of Travion Henderson, but I forgot to update it. So Devin Neal's my running back 7 and Travion Henderson's my running back 8. But I have a higher floor grade on Devin Neal than I do yeah, so I don't know why. So Devin Neal was my only second round running back, and then I had Travion Henderson in the third round. So that leaves a spot open. I guess I do have 64. Yeah. So Devin Neal's on Kansas. Yeah, Devin Neal's on Kansas with J. No, they're both in the Big 12, so it's all good. They're both in the Big 12. They're both thanks to conference realignment. But yeah, I have those 8 running backs that I mentioned in the first 2 rounds. I'm double checking the news ticker to see if I have a second or a third on Travion Henderson because I think I have him at 64 or 65. But either way, it's a really good running back class at the top. It's also a this is probably the best running back draft since 2017. I had Henderson in round 3, but I don't have I forgot to list 64 and 65. So there's a spot open at 64. Um I might move Abdul Carter up to that spot. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. There's just a lot of players that I need to see more from. I'm not going to give anybody the 64 spot. Yeah. I have after Travion Henderson, I have Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech as my next running back. Um, so I do have a third round grade on Travion Henderson, but I do think he could push himself into the late second round. But yeah, Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech's a really good running back. Senior, we're probably going to see him in the Senior Bowl. 71 carries, 379 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns so far. He had 1,500 yards last year. We haven't seen the same. Well, to actually, I can't really question his effort. He's had 100 rushing yards every game. 153 yards in the opener, 109 against North Texas, 117 against Arizona State. Texas Tech is 3-0. Taj Brooks is a big reason why Texas Tech is 3-0. So you really can't question the effort, even though the 379 rushing yards, 71 carries is somewhat underwhelming. In every game, and he's a big reason why Texas Tech is 3-0. So I guess he would be a third round. If you think he's a third round talent, I guess that's not far fetched at this point. That could change as Texas Tech plays tougher. Agreed. And the next running back I'm going to mention is Damian Martinez from the U, Miami, Florida running back. He was on Oregon State last year. He dominated on Oregon State last year. Entered the portal because Oregon State's no longer in the Pac-12, no longer a Power 5 program. But yeah, Damian Martinez, he's 20 years old. He had a really good season last year. He only has 250 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns this year. But a lot of that's due to the fact that Miami's become more of a pass-first offense this season. Whereas Oregon State, he was in a run-heavy offense. This year, yeah, and he doesn't have a game with 100 rushing yards yet. So that's the other thing right now. He did get 100 total yards against Florida A&M. He had 91 rushing, 15 receiving. So he did get 106 total yards against Florida A&M. And look, he's had 4 rushing touchdowns. 3 came against South Florida, 1 came against Florida A&M. So if both the Florida Gators and the Virginia Tech Hokies kept him out of the end zone. I might be a little bit higher on Martinez than the consensus is, but he's coming off a really good 2023 season. And it's at the point where I probably should move him down if I don't see more from him in the coming weeks. I mean, he had 2 really good years at Oregon State with Joshua Gray and Fuaga as his tackles. Miami's tackle situation this year hasn't been as good as it was the past 2 or 3 years. But Cam Ward's been able to make things happen despite that. Can't say the same about Martinez as his numbers are down, but I think that's due to the fact that Miami's been more pass happy under Cam Ward. But I still have him in the 3rd round as of right now. He's number 68 on my board. I may end up moving him down in the coming weeks. Yeah. I think it's probably Ward's better than advertised because really, after the sophomore year, the only question with Cam Ward was the progressions, and he went from 2 progressions in 2021 to 3 progressions in 2022 to 4 progressions in 2023 to 5 progressions out of 6 in 2024. So that was his big weakness, and he corrected that. So as far as I'm concerned, he's passed the eye test, and he's younger than Carson Beck. So that factors in as well. I have Donovan Edwards as my next running back, the Michigan running back who backed up Blake Corum. He's now the full-time starter, but we haven't seen that signature 100-yard game from Edwards yet. And Edwards is the guy Wes told me about years ago when they had him as the bell cow to Corum, and he had a few signature games against Ohio State when Corum was injured. Don't get me wrong, he's a good running back, but now that he's in the NFL, this is his backfield. We're not seeing that same intensity we saw from Edwards when he beat Ohio State the last 2 years. We're not seeing that same intensity on a week-to-week basis. So I do have to wonder when that's going to become problematic for Michigan. Because Michigan's got the number 1 fullback in the country. Yeah. Agreed. We're going to know by the end of the year. Nicholas Singleton at Penn State's the next running back. Dominated as a freshman, struggled as a sophomore. This year, he had 119, 114 rushing yards against Bowling Green in West Virginia. Only 81 yards against Kent State, but he did have a career high 2 receptions. Not a career high, a season high 2 receptions for 22 yards and a touchdown. And he's been averaging 11 yards a reception. He's not getting the ball frequently, but when he does, he's averaging 11 yards a catch consistently. So that's the thing with Singleton that stands out. He doesn't get the ball active, but when he does get the ball, he's averaging 10, 11 yards per reception. Those are wide receiver numbers. So if you use him situationally, he can move the chains. So I do like Singleton, but I want to see more. Penn State plays Illinois tonight at 8. That's a game that's really going to tell me a lot about Aller as well as Singleton. And I do think Singleton is going to get drafted ahead of Aller. I don't dislike Aller, but I have not seen enough from him this year to say he's a first, second, third, or fourth round quarterback. I have Aller in round 5 at the moment. And next up, RJ Harvey. He's the running back on Central Florida. I have him in the 3rd round too. Yeah. RJ Harvey. He dominated last year, but now that Javon Baker is gone, he's got to be the man in the backfield. You know, and last year he dominated last year. RJ Harvey, he had 1,416 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, and 226 carries. This year, he's at 448 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, and 1 receiving touchdown on 59 carries. And he had 142 yards against New Hampshire, 2 rushing touchdowns, 126 yards. And then he had 180 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns against TCU. RJ Harvey's a big reason why Central Florida is undefeated, and they play Colorado today. So Coach Prime better have a plan to stop RJ Harvey, because if he doesn't, RJ Harvey's going to chew up the clock, control time of possession, keep Shadur off the field. That's a big game coming up, Central Florida versus Colorado. Colorado is the home team, but nobody's been able to stop RJ Harvey so far this year. Big reason why the Golden Knights are 3-0. Have you seen RJ Harvey? Do you have anything you want to say about him? I think the best way for Coach Prime to evolve, I said this on the Under the Bleachers podcast. Go back to Florida State as a defensive coordinator for Mike Norvell. You'll learn under him, and if you earn his trust, maybe you'll get the team when he retires or takes another job if an SEC team poaches him away. Maybe you'll get another opportunity as a head coach at your alma mater. I think that's the best way for Coach Prime to evolve. I don't know if he wants to do that, though. And the final 3rd round running back is Quentin Cooley, Liberty running back. I might have this guy. I have this guy at 101 on my big board. But Liberty is undefeated. He had 1,400 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns last year. He's got 371 rushing yards and 53 carries, 4 touchdowns so far this season. Only team that kept him to under 100 yards was UTEP. UTEP's run defense was able to keep him in check, but he ran wild on East Carolina. He ran wild on New Mexico State. He ran wild on Campbell. Hasn't had any receptions yet, mainly used out of the backfield. Yeah, he is my final 3rd round running back. I had Martinez at RB10, Donovan Edwards at RB11, Nicholas Singleton's my RB12, Running back 13 for me is RJ Harvey, and running back 14 is Cooley. And I have those 14 running backs in the first 3 rounds. Now we get to some day 3 picks at running back. Kicking off round 4 is Trevor Etienne, Georgia. I mean, we saw this guy dominate at Florida for 2 years, and he's now the bell cow on the Georgia Bulldogs. And, you know, Trevor Etienne, he's the bell cow on the Georgia Bulldogs, but only 157 rushing yards and 24 carries. PFN does have a 3rd round grade on him, but I have a 4th round grade on him. It's not that I don't think Etienne can't sneak into day 2. It's just this running back class is so deep at the top, packed with star power, that I think he's sort of pushed down into day 3 as a result. And he hasn't had 100 yards for Georgia yet. Maybe he gets it tonight against Alabama. Maybe this is Trevor Etienne's breakout game for Georgia. But 78 rushing yards against Tennessee Tech and 9 yards against Kentucky. He didn't play in the opener against Clemson due to an injury. So for me right now, I have a day 3 grade on Trevor Etienne. But he is my. Yep. And there's one more 4th round running back on my rankings before we get to my 5th round running back. And I do think this is a really deep running back class. Next week we'll preview the fullbacks, but I think there's a ton of good running backs, and this is going to be the reason teams don't overpay running backs in free agency. Only the best will get extended. Only the best will get extended after their rookie deals, or unless they take team friendly deals. But yeah, Raheem Sanders. Raheem Sanders, also nicknamed Rocket Sanders. He was on Arkansas last year. He's on South Carolina now. I don't know why. I put Arkansas in the news ticker or in a week 4 for game recaps. I'm going to fix that right now. But the live stream in the news ticker says he Arkansas. I guess I typed Arkansas because that was the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, he no longer plays on Arkansas. He plays on South Carolina. But Raheem Rocket Sanders, I have him in the 4th round too, Joey. He is my he's my number 4. He's my number 16 running back out of 20 in this draft. But I do have a 4th round grade on Raheem Sanders. This was a guy before his injuries last year. He was considered the front runner to challenge Travion Henderson for running back 1 for his injuries last year. KJ Jefferson transferred as well. He transferred from Arkansas to Central Florida. So Yep. And my 1/5 round running back at RB17, I have Roman Hemby out of Maryland. I think even the guys in the 4th round, like ETN, Sanders, at the very worst, they're number 2 running backs that could end up developing into high-end starters. I don't see Pro Bowl running back. I don't see a running back with Pro Bowl upside after the 3rd round, but I think there's running backs in round 4 that they could be RB2s that develop into RB1s. But yeah, after Sanders, you're looking at RB3s or RB2s with these last 4 guys. But I'm going to start with Roman Hemby, the Maryland running back. He is my running back 17. And Roman Hemby is interesting because he's the Maryland running back. I thought he did a nice job last year taking pressure off of Taulia Tagovailoa. You know, he has 50 carries, 201 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns so far this year. And he is a junior. But, last year, I was really impressed with the 349 receiving yards he had and the 680 rushing yards. Over 1,000 total yards. He's done it 2 years in a row where he's had over 1,000 total yards. This year, he's just reverted. This year, he's sort of reverted a little bit. I have him in round 5. My round 6 running back is Jo'quavious Marks. He was the Mississippi State running back a year ago. He transferred to USC. So, and we were talking about Marks in last year's running back rankings, but he never declared. He entered the portal. Apparently, he's changed his name to Woody Marks. If you type in Jo'quavious Marks on Google, you get Woody Marks. But, 42 carries, 271 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. A big part of this USC Trojans offense. And he's a guy who takes a lot of pressure off of the quarterback. But yeah, he had 103 rushing yards against Utah State. He had 100 rushing yards on Michigan despite the loss. Michigan kept him out of the end zone, but he's still able to get 100 yards on Michigan's defense. That does say something. But he is my running back 18 as well as my only 6th round running back. And then my 2 7th round running backs, they are both MAC guys, Joey. I have at RB19, I have Antonio Brown out of Northern Illinois, and I have Terrian Stewart out of Bowling Green as running back 20. So I do have a few group of 5 players on this list, some MAC players in this group, Joey. So yeah, I do have a few MAC players in this group. And we saw Northern Illinois, they beat Notre Dame back in a few weeks ago. But yeah, looking at Antonio Brown, he had 99 rushing yards, 126 receiving yards against Notre Dame in the upset win. He just popped in that Notre Dame game. And then he had 73 rushing yards and 22 receiving yards in the overtime loss to Buffalo last week. I have a 7th round grade on Antonio Brown, but I do think I do think he's a late round option. And then my other running back is Terrian Stewart, Bowling Green. I have 7th round grades on both of these guys, but yeah, I do like what I see from both of them. Terrian Stewart is averaging 7.5 yards a carry. He's only gotten 27 carries, but his yards per carry of 7.5 is best in the country, which is Bowling Green's only played 2 games. They played Fordham and they played Texas A&M. And he averaged 11.5 yards on 14 carries against Fordham. He only averaged 3.2 yards a carry against Texas A&M. That's why Terrian Stewart is my RB20, because even though he leads the country in yards per carry, it's not consistent. But yeah, that's my list. And any thoughts on that running back list? It's a good running back group. And I think with teams not wanting to pay running backs, they're going to look heavily at this class when reloading. All right. So we will. It's still very early. Next week, I'll give you my top 5 fullbacks. We'll have a thumbnail for the fullbacks. But my top 5 fullbacks, that's next Saturday, and we're gonna have an easier, fun, laid back show where after I go through the top 5 fullbacks, I have 7th round grades in them all. After I go through the fullback rankings, we're gonna go straight into the Pacific Division and the ALDS and NLDS matchups. We go through the wild card matchups, but we don't know the official games until Monday. We're not going to know the official games until Monday, and then the games start on Tuesday. So, really doesn't make a lot of sense to break down something, and the wild card games will be Tuesday through Friday, and then we'll have the ALDS and NLDS on Saturday. We'll know the matchups. So we'll break down we'll crown our World Series winners then. But we did pretty well, 9 for 12. We'll break that down on TalkShoe, but I'm going to sign off on Restream and load the other live stream up where